Good morning.
This meeting is being held in compliance with the Brown Act. SCAG offices are open for members of the public to attend and participate in person.
Good morning.
Instructions for providing public comment have been provided in advance and are
Please
also
take your
included.
seat. We're going to start soon. Thank you. The video will start before I do. Thank you very much.
This meeting is being held in compliance with the Brown Act. SCAG offices are open for members of the public to attend and participate in person. Instructions for providing public comment have been provided in advance and are also included in the agenda packet. If a member of this body is attending remotely but is not at a location specified on the agenda, they may observe and comment as a member of the public, but may not participate in any member discussion or voting of this body. For all members participating remotely, please ensure your microphone is muted when not in use. Please state your name during deliberations and whether making a motion or offering a second. Any voting member or member of the public calling into this meeting by telephone can press *6 to mute and unmute. All telephone participants should identify themselves prior to speaking. SCAG encourages all members of the public to participate in its meetings. We are committed to holding meetings accessible to people with disabilities. For members of the public requiring ADA accommodation, please call 213-630-1410. SCAG offers free interpretation services for members of the public needing information in another language. Please call 213-236-1895. The meeting will now begin.
Good morning and welcome to the September 5th, 2024 Community Economic and Human Development Committee meeting today. I'd like to call the meeting to order and ask the Honorable Tanya Doby to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
All right, y'all put your right hand over your heart, ready to begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. I'll ask the clerk to confirm a quorum for today's meeting.
Chair, we do have a quorum.
Thank you. And I see we have a lot of people online as well, so I appreciate everyone being here and virtually as well. We'll open the public comment period for the meeting. Staff, have we received any written public comments after the deadline of 5 p.m. on Wednesday, September 4th, 2024?
Mr. Chair, we did not receive any written public comments after the deadline of 5 p.m. on Wednesday, September 4th, 2024.
Okay. Do we have any members of the public who wish to speak on any non-agendized items? I don't see any in person and any virtually. I don't see any. I will now close the public comment period for matters not listed on the agenda. We'll now move to review and prioritize agenda items. Is there anyone wishing to take a matter off the agenda or prioritize it in a different manner than it is already listed? Seeing no one in person, seeing no one virtually, we'll move to the consent calendar. Do we have any members of the public who wish to speak on this item?
Mr. Chair, I do not see any members of the public wishing to provide public comment in person or online.
Thank you very much. Just a reminder before we move forward, if any member of this body is attending remotely and is not at a location specified on the agenda, they may observe and comment as a member of the public, but may not participate or vote in any member discussion or voting of this body. In order to save time, if anyone wants to pull anything from the consent calendar, I ask that we have staff presentations before moving to roll call vote for the consent calendar. I don't see anyone wishing to move anything. If no one wants to pull any agenda item, then can I ask for a motion to approve the consent calendar, agenda items 1, and receive and file items 2?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Did you get those?
Bucknam, second.
Thank you.
Thank you. Madam Clerk, will you do a roll call vote, please?
Yes.
Thank you.
This is for the consent calendar, item number 1, and receive and file item number 2. Gary Boyer,
Yes.
Wendy Bucknam.
Yes.
Tanya Doby.
Yeah.
Deborah Dorst Parada. Bobby Duncan.
Yes.
Keith Ike. Bob Engler.
Yes.
Espinosa. Margaret Finley. Claudia Frometta. John Gabbard. Camilo Garcia.
Yes.
Thank you. Marsha Goodman. Mark Henderson. Cecilia Hupp. William Hussey.
Yes.
Linda Johnson.
Yes.
Thank you. Kathleen Kelly.
Yes.
Matt Levere.
Yes.
Chad Leon.
Yes.
Carlos Leon. Annie Marshall.
Yes.
Thank you. Andrew Maciel. Geneva Mojado. Joseph Morbito.
Yes.
Seth Mullins.
Yes.
Joseph Murphy. George Nava. Maricela Nava.
Yes.
Perez. Freddie Puta.
Yes.
Gabriel Reyes.
Yes.
Rocky Road.
Yes.
Sonny Santinez.
Yes.
David Shapiro.
Yes.
Becky Shevlin.
Yes.
Mary Solorio.
Yes.
Jeff Wood.
Yes.
Tony Wu.
Yes.
Yokoyama. And Frank Serrano. Thank you. Chair, the consent calendar, items 1 and 2 passes with 29 yes votes, 0 no votes, and 0 abstentions.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Now we'll move on to item number 3, which is something this committee has done before, and it's been really helpful and informative to all of us, especially new members. It's Darren's here. I call upon Darren Chidsey, Chief Operating Officer for SCAG, to give us a SCAG 101 refresher. Welcome.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. It's great to be here. Again, I'm Darren Chidsey. I'm the Deputy Executive Director and Chief Operating Officer here at SCAG. And every year when we get together, the Executive Committee gets together for a retreat, we always started off with a SCAG 101. And that's because oftentimes there's new members to that committee. The organization has changed a lot over the last 5 years. And as we talk through this, you'll see the new responsibilities they have, the new resources we have to bring forward. And so the chair said, why don't we bring that same presentation to CEHD? It's just a good refresher to get all of you aware of the events that happen, not just within this committee's purview, but that are going on throughout the organization as a whole. So I'll move quickly because I know you have a very busy agenda today, but please feel free to stop. and ask questions as we move through it. That says SCAG 101, but it might be a 201, since I know most of you have been around a little while and be a little bit more advanced, but I promise we'll get the basics done as well. Starting off, I think everybody's familiar with this. It's a large region, 6 counties, 191 cities, 16 tribal governments. When you think about our region from an economic standpoint, 15th largest economy in the world. So that certainly, puts it up there in one of the most important regions in the world. About 50% of the state's population is right here in Southern California, and about 18.7 million residences. I know everybody knows this, but I think it's always good to start with because it just shows how important the work that you do in supporting this agency is for the future of not just this region, not just the communities that you represent, but certainly the state, the country, and has an impact globally as well. Our vision is Southern California's catalyst for a brighter future. This is something we developed maybe 7 or 8 years ago now, and I think the catalyst word is always one that sticks out to me because it's the ideas, it's the innovation, it's the policy leadership, the political leadership that this organization does that really sparks others in the region that are more on the implementing side to be able to do their work better. And our mission, I won't read, but certainly I think the key words is inclusive collaboration, visionary planning, regional advocacy, information sharing, and promoting best practices. And as you start to see our current work plan, all of those things are very much at the core to it. The Regional Council certainly is the governing body of the organization and is led by those on the screen. I think you know them all well. That goes through an election process every year. A nomination committee is established. That committee recommends somebody to the Regional Council, and then that those candidates move on to the General Assembly. Always, I know we get questions of those of you that are interested. How does that process go about? One of the things that the Regional Council has adopted in recent years, I should say the General Assembly, is that there should be a chair or vice chair time serving before you enter into leadership. So certainly your work on the committee is a critical first step for those of you that are interested in pursuing future leadership here at SCAG, but this is a extremely talented group and it's great to work with them. I should add too that although you might see them on RC days, this group meets outside of the Regional Council meeting days. We usually check in with them at least once a month, if not more, and the president on a bi-weekly basis to really provide that oversight and leadership over the organization and ensure that we're moving in a coordinated way. Just real quick review of the governance structure of General Assembly. Every city, county, member organization has a role in the General Assembly. This is the group that meets once a year, I'm sorry, in May out in Palm Desert. For those of you that haven't been, put it on your calendar, the first Thursday in May. That's where we'll be. It's always an exciting time to join and meet those from the rest of the region. Many years ago before my time, they thought that maybe it would be a little bit complicated to have a 200-person governing body really run an organization. So that's when they delegated that authority to the Regional Council, which still is 86 members in total. And those are the committees that help support the work that the Regional Council does. And you see your committee right there is one of the other committees. Strategic plan priorities, about a month or two ago now, we just revised these priorities. It was an important conversation for us to have and to lead with the executive committee and the Regional Council because SCAG had changed so much since we did our last update of our strategic plan. We have new housing resources, we have greater responsibilities, and so we thought it would be important to kind of refine exactly what it is we're trying to accomplish over the next 5 years, and are pretty excited about these plan priorities. We are still working internally as staff to really put KPIs on each of them so we can really better report out to all of you exactly what success looks like and what the progress in each fiscal year we have made under each goal. So look for that to return shortly. Our core values, a lot of organizations obviously have core values. I will tell you, this is something that really we work to define internally. The culture of our staff is very much a mission-driven staff. You'll know that when you encounter my colleagues, whether in these meetings or throughout the office. People are here because they're committed to the vision and the mission of the organization, and also these values. And we hold high standards on all of them, but it certainly extends to the broader regional council and policy committee members as well, is how important it is to really live and embody these terms that are on the board. Now, that's kind of a little bit of the overview structure, and but just to talk about briefly what we do. I know you know a lot about that, but maybe just want to hopefully highlight some things that you don't know. Certainly, you know, the four key things, and this was evident in our strategic plan goals, and started with transportation. We were formed in 1965, really as a product of the federal government needing to do better coordinated transportation planning in metropolitan areas throughout the country. We officially got designated a metropolitan planning organization in the late 60s. And so that's where our core responsibilities have always been. But as time has grown, and I think regions have become more complicated, cities have become more complicated, it just became more and more relevant. You can't do transportation planning unless you understand land use, unless you understand the economy, know how the impacts to the environment are affecting residents, and all of those things coordinated together. So everything might have started as being a metropolitan planning organization focused on long-range transportation planning. That has evolved to really be an agency that's focused on comprehensive regional planning. Now, sometimes the state policies and federal policies might not be aligned with what we think is best for the region. So certainly we have a very robust advocacy program as well to ensure that Southern California's voice is being heard in Sacramento and in DC. As we highlighted, 50% of the state's population is right here in Southern California, but sometimes because some of our other parts of the state might be a little closer to the state capital, we think their voices might be heard a little bit louder. So that's something we really focus on to ensure that we're counterbalancing that and that ensuring that our leaders understand where Southern California is on important legislative issues. So our primary responsibilities are listed here. I think you probably all know number 4 the most, but it certainly is an important piece to do all of the comprehensive regional planning that we do, the regional transportation plan being at its core. The sustainable community strategy was a new-ish state requirement that allows us to look at how land use and other factors really help us as a region reduce greenhouse gas emissions through the transportation sector. We'll have some updates on that, certainly because our latest plan is being reviewed by the Air Resources Board as we speak. And then the FTIP is really the more short-term investment document that the Regional Council approves and we put together. And we also really focus on information and data. None of this work can be done if we don't understand what's happening in the region. And so for years, we'd always really focused that data work for our work. But what we realized over the last 4 or 5 years, the more information we can make available to the region, to cities, to other partners that are doing work in our space, the better off they'll be in their decision-making processes. So we've really focused on a regional data platform and other tools to ensure that that information is available widely and accurately. So at its core, what we do as an organization is Connect SoCal. That is the long-term vision for Southern California. It's a 20-year plan. It calls for $751 billion in transportation investments. That is a very large number, obviously, but when you think about the time frame that we're talking about, 20 plus years, plus the 19 million people in the region, and the economic value that we present to the country and to the world, it's understandable why those resources are needed and how important it is for our success. Highlights, you know, a lot of different things, not just mobility and communities, which are really key, but we want to ensure that we're reducing congestion and travel times. We also want to give greater opportunity and flexibility for those that are want to make trips outside of a single occupancy vehicle. And you're going to hear later at the regional council meeting an update on with some of our partners on an update of transit recovery that certainly is focused on this. The plan also looks to conserve open space and farmland, balancing the needs for open space and certainly our ag communities with the need for housing as well as jobs. So we're pretty proud of the work that we do and certainly thank the committee for their critical role in helping develop so many key portions of that. But it really sets the foundation for all the work that we do. Highlight of kind of the revenues, happy to answer questions, but gives you a sense about how we break down the different funding sources. I think the important thing that I would highlight here is, as you see on the left, only 6% of the resources in the plan are from the federal government. If you go back 20 years, maybe a little more, that number is about 80%. So regions, states have been called upon more to solve their own problems, which I think is another reason why organizations like ours have gained relevance and importance, because we now have a decision to make how we want to spend resources in the region, and those resources are generally through local sales tax measures, others being generated within the region and staying here. I'll highlight goods movement a little bit. I know this committee doesn't focus on it quite as much, but certainly when it comes to land use side and understanding where warehousing and other developments are happening in the region. There was a time when transportation planning was very focused on passengers getting to and from work, getting to and from school, which is obviously a very large component of a transportation system. But SCAG was at the forefront of really understanding there's a lot of other people that use the roads, particularly the freight industry. And in Southern California, when 40% of all goods in the United States come in through the ports of LA and Long Beach, and we had the opportunity to visit some of us the port of Hueneme just last Friday. We know that it's a critical part of our economy, and it's a critical part of how we can invest smartly to ensure that we're balancing community needs as well. That we have a very large program focused on understanding the movement of goods in the region and really developing ideas and initiatives that help clean up that industry, as well as ensuring that their impacts on local communities are minimal, because we have good options for moving goods throughout the region. So a lot of great work there that the Transportation Committee focuses on a lot. Clean mobility technology, certainly this is a big emphasis of the state. It's a big part of our Connect SoCal plan, is we know that we need to get a cleaner force, but we can't do that without a more reliable and robust charging network. Fortunately, there are some federal resources available on this, and it's something that we've focused on really over the last decade, have been kind of the forefront on some of these initiatives, partnering with Edison, partnering with others to get our region ready, because we do have a higher proportion of electric vehicles than anywhere else in the country. The transit and rail strategies, we're going to talk about this at the regional council meeting for those of you that can stay around that aren't on the regional council, but transit still is the backbone of our regional transportation planning. Certainly COVID has changed some of those dynamics, but we know so many in the region don't have access to a car for a variety of reasons. And so understanding how, from an economic standpoint, we allow people to travel in a reasonable time outside of a vehicle is critical. And we want to ensure that there's opportunities that those that do have vehicles still make sense for them to use our robust bus and train system. So a lot of exciting work going on, also primarily at the Transportation Committee. You guys could all teach me all these housing ones, because I know that's what this committee is focused on day in and day out. But a real kind of change in the work that SCAG did came in 2019 that I do want to highlight. For years, we never had resources to really focus on housing planning, which is pretty amazing since we've been doing RHNA since the 70s. The state has never funded housing work at the regional level. 2019, there was a regional early action planning grants, about $47 million, which was the first time SCAG received from the state dedicated housing planning money. It allowed us not just to have a robust staff in order to work on these issues, but just as critically work with our subregions on outreach, on partnership, and really understand how our sustainable community strategy integrates to all of our various growth strategies. So new tools came out of that. It's been a huge success, and I think legislatively, one of the things we will be focusing on in the years ahead is how do we ensure that those resources come back, because we know all of the cities sitting around the table certainly need our help and greater expertise on top of just what's available at the resources at the city level to bring the region forward. After that, we came the REAP 2.0 program. It's a very different program actually than REAP 1, but just as important when it comes to housing issues. This was more focused on implementation and building projects. A lot happening in that right now. I know you probably all heard it was delayed for 6 months as the governor talked about cutting it in his state budget. Thanks to all of you and the great advocacy from throughout the region, we were able to get that funding restored almost in its entirety. That certainly puts the work ahead of us in a little bit of a shorter time frame as it speaks right now. So that's, I'd say, the number one goal internally at SCAG is ensuring that we're getting those monies out to the region, getting all the memorandums of understanding, all the contracts done, everything that needs to be done so that we can get those projects moving as quickly as possible. We talked a little bit about collaboration and advocacy. I think this is certainly one of the most important roles that nobody else in the region can really play, or at the state. We're talking a little bit about the executive committee meeting this morning about the Olympics. There are these opportunities that at a city level, at a county level, problems just can't be solved, and the state being too big. So one of the key things that SCAG has always done is been able to fill that hole in the regional standpoint. Our regional conference and General Assembly is an example of that. It's a conference that we put together to talk about what's really important in Southern California. How do we share ideas with cities about wanting to move forward certain ideas, as well as learn from others. We started about 12 years ago now, the Southern California Economic Summit. This traditionally has been the first Thursday in December. And it's, again, to understand what's going on in our economy. We can't plan, we can't understand how and what we need to change from a policy standpoint if we don't know the foundations of how our economics in our region are performing today. So certainly a very exciting program. And then coming up just later this month, couple weeks, the demographic workshop. This is something that I think it's one of the most interesting things we do at SCAG. It's certainly for those of you that are love data and information, it's kind of breaking down what the demographics in Southern California look like. It certainly is the foundation of all planning, is understanding how many of each age category and income category. Are they growing? Are they shrinking? So we do this workshop with USC once a year. And for those of you that haven't participated or logged in, it's an extremely informational session about what the future of Southern California looks like and trends and how that balances to other regions throughout the country. So state legislative priorities for this year: protect our REAP 2.0 funding. We did that. Regional housing needs assessment reform. Unfortunately, we had a bill urging HCD to add greater transparency to the determination process. That was held and did not move forward, but we'll certainly work with our legislative committee as to how we are going to move forward on that in the future. And the active transportation program and infill infrastructure grant program, that was a bit of a mixed bag, but it's a tough year legislatively, because certainly with where the budget was at, but certainly getting our number one priority accomplished is something that we do want to celebrate. As we're moving forward and looking at our federal legislative priorities, there's a lot that will be happening at the federal level. We are entering a period of reauthorization. SCAG's main funding bill out of the federal level comes from the Surface Transportation Reauthorization Bill. That's due up next year. So working with our federal delegation, understanding the needs that we have for long-term federal transportation policy is going to be critical. We also want to work with the federal government more on housing. That is something the federal government has not been as engaged with at the local level. And so we think there's opportunities there to build upon. And certainly number 5, the 2028 Summer Olympic Games. That is something that the city of LA, as well as many other jurisdictions throughout Southern California, will have a critical part in hosting. And we do think that there is a federal role to help support those efforts, as well as it certainly will reflect on the country as a whole. So I know I covered a lot. I hope that was helpful. Mr. Chair, happy to answer any questions, but appreciate the time and hope that was informative to the committee.
Thank you very much, Darren. I'm going to start by asking if there are any members of the public wishing to speak on this item. And
Mr. Chair, I do not see any members of the public wishing to participate online or in person.
okay, thank you very much. And again, this is an information item. Truly appreciate your being here and giving us, again, the 101, 201, whatever you want to call it. But there's opportunities to get involved more than just this committee for anybody who wishes to. But I will say right up front, I think this committee is one of the best with the greatest minds. But other than that, we're okay. I'll ask if there are any comments from members of the CHD committee. Seeing no hands or cards raised. Any online? I don't see any online. Can I verify that with you? Okay. All right, then I will just comment. Thank you, Darren. Again, the advocacy efforts for REAP 2.0 were excellent in Sacramento. That saved a lot of programs. And just wondering, quick question for you, Darren, I'll ask. The World Cup has not been mentioned at EAC or here or anywhere. I know we have the Olympics coming up. Is there any consideration of starting? It's very soon, I know, and it's been moved back and forth for where the locations are going to be, but it is at least part of it in LA, is my understanding.
It's a big effort, and certainly there's a lot of work on that as well. Yeah, but I think what we do for that and help build will help build and set a better foundation for what comes 2 years later with the Olympics as well.
Well, thank you very much. Appreciate it and appreciate this information. And the presentation is in the agenda, so anybody can show that if they wish as well. Oh, I do see a hand raised by the Honorable Wendy Beckman.
Thank you. So you brought up a really good point, and I wonder if it would be worthy of an opportunity in the near future to get a presentation from our sports commissions for both the Southern California region, whether it's, Riverside. I think each county has their own. It might be worthwhile to explore that because that's going to be having major economic impact on the region, both of those events. So thank you for mentioning that because that's something we should definitely keep on our radar, and it will set the tone for transportation, mobility, et cetera. So I wonder if that's a worthwhile presentation in the future. Just putting it out there. Thank you.
Certainly a good point. We can discuss that possibly right in line with the next item, I think.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. We'll move on to item number 4. And I'll ask, do we have any members of the public wishing to speak on this item, future outlook and future agenda items for SCAG, for our committee?
Mr. Chair, I do not see any members of the public wishing to participate.
Okay. This is an information item. Staff prepares the CHD agenda outlook every year to inform our agenda for the upcoming year. This year, I asked staff to survey our members to get feedback on CHD relevant topics that you all want to discuss or have discussed. A survey was distributed and the results have been completed and informed the outlook that is before you today. The Vice Chair and I went over the results with staff before today's meeting, and I will now ask Elizabeth Carvajal, Deputy Director of Planning in Land Use, to walk us through the agenda for this year.
Trying to unmute myself. Oh, there it is. Okay, the light didn't show here. Good morning, everyone. Elizabeth Carvajal, Deputy Director of Planning and Land Use. As you all are aware, every year we prepare an agenda outlook that highlights the topics that we bring before you. Let me move my slides here. There we go. And so I'm going to walk you through the outlook for this particular fiscal year. Before I dig in, I want to highlight the focus of the CEHD, which you're all very familiar with. We deal with issues around housing, community, economic development, human development. And so those are really the core areas that are the focus of this particular policy committee. And so we did things differently this year. As the chair noted, he asked for us to put out a survey. We released it. It was very brief. It had 3 questions focused on housing, economic development, and miscellaneous topics within the purview of CEHD. We received a total of 15 responses. We reviewed those responses and then categorized the feedback by question around major themes, and then made some updates to the outlook. I do want to highlight that this fiscal year, we have a total of 6 meetings, so we have a more compressed schedule. In addition, we have 1 joint policy committee meeting that's anticipated in February. And so the outlook was updated to reflect removing some items and adding items in alignment with the survey responses. I do want to highlight that in the staff report, there is a summary of the feedback by themes. And so what we'll do is, for example, if something falls off the agenda, we'll look to that document to inform a new item, and we can also refer to it in future years. Right. So as a reminder, the first question focused on housing, and in general wanted to know what are the topics that you want to discuss, what are things we want to learn more about. And the major themes that came out of that feedback were first, housing production, and that is focused on affordable housing and market rate housing, as well as housing location. So certainly looking at the urban core, but also looking at places outside the core as we consider these things. The second major theme focused on resources. There was interest around first-time home buyer programs, as well as resources and funding for jurisdictions and agencies to build housing. We then had a theme around technical information, and I listed the things under that. So Surplus Land Act, streamlining tools, how enacted legislation affects housing rules and production. And then we had the data topic, or major theme, I should say. And so there were requests for looking at housing production over a longer period of time, as well as ADU data. The second theme, or excuse me, question focused on economic development. Again, we wanted to hear, what do you want to learn about? What do you want to discuss? And on this one, we had 3 major themes. The first was around downtown recovery. The second was around economic development best practices and tools. And the third was around resources and partnerships to support economic development. And then the last question was more broad, miscellaneous. What are the other things that you want to talk about that are within the purview of CEHD? And so the themes that I would highlight here were around placemaking, investments for placemaking and best practices, as well as broader data information. And so I did my best to not make this super messy. As a reminder, we prepared an agenda outlook in June that was shared with the EAC. And so what I did here is I updated it so you can see what I took out and what I added in. And so just to orient you, there's a key at the bottom left for me, hand corner. There's a little diamond that represents the emerging technology item, and that is part of the president's priorities. When there's a check mark next to an item, that represents local assistance programs. That's our grant programs and important SCAG program updates. So these are the things that we really need to bring before you and should be on the agenda. And then I have a strikeout when we remove something, and when we added something new, it's shown in a bold italicized text. And so starting off with the September to December period, I want to note there won't be a meeting in October. We removed 7 items in this period. The check marks are, again, those local assistance must-have presentations around Connect SoCal, REAP 1, and our Inclusive Economic Growth Update, which is a state-funded program. And I will highlight that the expanding homeownership item under Connect SoCal, that's the last bullet, was part of the original outlook and in line with the feedback that we heard about wanting to hear more about homeownership programs. I'm going to shift to the next period. So February to March, noting there will not be a meeting in January. In this section, we removed 3 items. The check marks, the local assistance, important SCAG updates are part of Connect SoCal. We anticipate a joint policy committee meeting in February and then a REAP 2 update. And the downtown revitalization economic development strategies item under regional leadership, that's the first bullet, that was on the agenda and aligns with the feedback we received in the survey. And then we have the factory built housing item, which is part of the emerging technology that is in line with the president's priorities. And then we have April to June, noting that there wouldn't be a meeting in May as we have our General Assembly. In this period, we removed 8 items and we added 3 items. And so those 3 items are first under the Connect SoCal column, housing production strategies across the region. On this one, we want to tackle affordable housing, market rate housing, where you build housing, how does it look different across the region? Then we have the housing production data item where we're going to look at data, the long view, the ADU, and then we added best practices for economic development. You'll see that there are 2 items in the bottom of the regional leadership column around community land trust and community development funding programs, and those were maintained as they align with the feedback around resources and hearing more about land trust programs. I will say that after this meeting, it won't look like this. It'll be nice and clean. I just wanted you to see how we made the changes. And so with that, that concludes my presentation. Happy to take questions, clarify. Please let me know. And again, I do want to say again, in attachment A or 1, I believe, to the staff report, we have a list of themes. If something falls through, we'll go back to that to pull things into the agenda, and we'll look at that as well as we look for future years. So I want to make sure that I say that. So please let me know, Chair, if there's any questions for me.
Thank you very much. I'm sure there'll be questions. Thank you for the report and the hard work. And it's tricky because as if you heard it, we're but we're not having 3 meetings, 2 that were expected, 1 in May is not. So our time is truncated, but we have a lot of important issues and want to hear from everybody. The Honorable Tanya Doby first.
Thank you for phenomenal presentation. I have a quick question. I think I could probably ask just about anybody, but I know this is your wheelhouse. Can you help me understand, and if it has to be tabled for later, I'm fine with that. If we're 50% of the region and we're all on the same page about RHNA reform, what is the holdup to getting us to the finish line on that? And yes, you know, I'm going to ask a housing question, so bear with me, y'all. But what is it? Why are we not able to get across the finish line with this? And who do we need to go? And because I'm in Sacramento, I go to DC. Who do we have to go and see?
I'm going to phone a friend.
Hello, Kevin Gohuli, State and Federal Legislative Affairs Manager. Being mindful that our meetings are recorded and streamed live, there just is not political support for reform to the RHNA program in Sacramento. I think that's the bottom line. We've tried. Our bill made it through several policy committees, but was held in Senate Appropriations Committee this year. We got a lot of local support. But at the end of the day, our bill died a quiet and slow death in Senate Appropriations, where there's no opportunity for public comment. So be happy to share additional details after the meeting with the history of our particular bill, but we have certainly tried to do RHNA reform, and there just is not political support for it in Sacramento. Yeah.
But I was going to say, while you're up there, Kevin, that doesn't mean our committee and those involved who wish it can't still speak out or be actively involved in the process.
That's I apologize for taking over your meeting. That's absolutely true, Mr. Chair. In fact, we would anticipate that because HCD had its California Housing Futures 2040 report this year that came out in April, that there will be a lot of interest among legislators in having additional legislative bills relating to RHNA reform. I think that there will probably be one-offs where there'll be little fixes here or there. I think from a SCAG perspective, we'd like to see a lot more transparency in the RHNA program, but there also needs to be some comprehensive reevaluation of the program and maybe marry it more closely with our Sustainable Communities SB 375 requirements as well. So there's certainly appetite and interest from SCAG in taking a more wholesale, more comprehensive review of that particular program. But what we've seen so far from the legislature this year is that our ideas have not been their ideas. Yeah.
Thank you. And I see Honorable Jeff Wood.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was on another committee, so I don't know if this was ever addressed, but to me, when I think about economic development, can't really have it if people don't have jobs. And I'm wondering if workforce development has been an area that's been covered or if it's covered by something else. I know a lot of us may serve on another workforce development board, which I actually do. But I think with jobs, as we're talking about the Olympics, we're talking about World Cup, we're talking about a lot of service and a lot of hospitality. I'm wondering, that seems to me that should be a focus, because again, if you don't have jobs, you're not going to have a prosperous economy. So I'm just wondering if that's something that has been looked at in the past.
Yeah, so in response to that, two things. One is that as part of our inclusive economic recovery strategy, we've been doing some evaluation around workforce development, quality jobs, et cetera. And so we're going to be providing an update to the committee as part of this fiscal year. In addition, I think that that's an excellent point as we're thinking about economic development best practices. Part of it has to be like the jobs that are being created for folks, right? And how that's part of revitalizing economic activity in a community. So we can make sure that that's part of like the lens for that particular presentation.
And I know staff's been working very hard for years, and the regional council as well, to create housing near transportation hubs to provide access for jobs or easy potential opportunities for job and for all those living close by. And oh, I see a hand raised. Anyone else present? I don't see any. Oh, I do. Honorable Wendy Buckman.
Thank you. I thank you so much for your report, and my colleague, esteemed colleague over here did allude to what I mentioned earlier before the agenda started, and that is on the economic development front, really addressing the impact that these two major sporting events are going to have on our region from an economic standpoint. I think it's going to be key to weaving that into one of these discussions. So it looks like it could fit perfectly in one of those. So thank you.
Right. Thank you.
Vice Chair Rocky Rhodes.
Just on that topic, I think that if we even parse that a little bit more, transportation, I think we have the Transportation Committee to really be looking at that. I didn't hear from our report this morning in the executive session, but there is a possibility out there that we might get tapped for some sort of housing of athletes and that sort of thing. And I think that would be something we'd want to get way ahead of sooner rather than later, so that we can talk about partnering with cities for, outside of the main downtown area, and then how do we house them inside? But so far, I don't think we've been asked for that.
Taking notes.
Great, thank you. And I don't see any other cards or hands in person. So online, I see Bobby Duncan. Am I correct?
Yes. Good morning, everyone. As it relates to the RHNA report, or the bill dying a slow to ugly death at the Senate, I'm trying to figure out how we can allow the state to come up with some type of ordinance or rule about RL zoning. We have a situation. We're trying our best to meet the RHNA numbers that we've been allocated, but we have a certain group of citizens in our city that live in an area in our city that's RL zone, which is rural living. And those are large lots where people have horses and so forth and livestock. But whenever the local government tries to accommodate the RHNA numbers, or at least try to find some compromise with the local citizens, they come to the council meetings and threaten the leadership of the city, and threaten to recall, threaten to do all kinds of fun things. And a lot of times the local leadership will cow down to them and not allow, not do what they know needs to be done as far as the local ordinances are concerned. So I'm just trying to figure out how we can get some type of ruling or some type of information on RL zoning, which typically is large lots, but those large lots could be developed into some type of residential multifamily, or at least some type of smaller accommodation for housing, in order to help the local agency do their job in trying to get the RHNA numbers met, responsibly, of course. But that's my only point with the RHNA situation, is trying to figure out how to deal with the local citizens. And I know it's their right to protest, but in some cases they threaten the council by the local leadership by recall and torture and punish the local leadership for trying to meet these numbers. I just wonder if there's some kind of way that we can look at RL zoning in the state and try to find some compromise.
Thank you very much. And I don't see any other hearts raised, hands raised online. And so we'll thank you for the presentation. I know we'll be coming back with more information for the committee. And we seem to be really sharp this morning because Bobby, your comments lead into our next item, which is item number 5, the review of California's Housing Future 2040, the next regional housing needs allocation. Do we have any members of the public wishing to speak on this item?
Mr. Chair, I don't see any members of the public wishing to participate online or in person.
Okay, this is we begin our favorite topic of work here on HCD and RHNA. This is an information item. The California Department of Housing and Community Development, also known as HCD, published a report in May with recommendations to reform the RHNA process. As you may recall, in September 2023, the committee and the regional council reviewed and approved a comment letter that contained recommendations for HCD to consider for RHNA reform. The list of recommendations were developed through a SCAG-led engagement process. For this item, SCAG staff will present on how HCD's report compares to SCAG's recommendations and will also provide an overview of other topics not covered in SCAG's recommendations. At this point, I'll turn it over to SCAG's Housing Development Manager, Mayan Johnson. Take it away.
Thank you, Chair Shapiro, and good morning, members of the CEHD Committee. I'm Mayan Johnson, Housing Department Manager. I have been working on RHNA for the past 18 years, and I can definitely testify there has never been a dull moment, and everybody does have an opinion on RHNA, even if you don't know it yet. So a little background about this report this report reviews. It was a requirement of AB 101 from 2019, and it requires HCD to take a look at RHNA statute and propose recommendations to the state legislature on reforming the RHNA process, which is very important because it is a convoluted set of laws that we all try to implement every 8 years. And so this requirement also came from the same legislation that did bring us REAP 1. So there were definitely good things that came out of that legislation. So as part of their report, HCD did do statewide outreach. They did what they called the sounding board in 2023, which was inviting experts on housing from around the state to sit in, and they would bounce some ideas off of them. However, those notes from those meetings and minutes from those meetings were not published. And so I was able, by participating on that committee, to provide updates to this committee last year. But obviously, HCD, if they've had other deliberations or outside of that, those aren't available publicly, and I haven't seen them myself. So this report was due in 2020, at the end of 2023, but it was published in 2024. So as part of their engagement process, SCAG, as the chair mentioned, we submitted a comment letter that was reviewed by this committee as a result of extensive public engagement by SCAG, and then ultimately approved by the regional council. So we submitted that last year. And so this report, or my report here, goes over the recommendations that we provided, and then also how the report is evaluated against it. HCD did not provide a specific timeline for implementing their recommendations in their report, but they did say ideally they'd like them implemented by the 7th cycle. For some context, SCAG, we finished our cycle. We adopted our final RHNA in early 2021. So that would put the next cycle, I believe, we'd probably start around 2026. So you do have a few years, but they go by quickly. And we have all these recommendations that HCD would like to implement beforehand. So just a a highlight of shared perspectives. We always like to start with the good things. Our recommendations, I'll go over the overview of them, but HCD did provide the recommendation that the regional housing needs determination, so that that large regional number, that 1.34 million number, is given to COGS 1 year earlier than the current due date. This would allow for a little less rush process, but allow us to work at the same time concurrently with our regional transportation planning, our Connect SoCal plan, allow us to not rush through appeals process and other important methodology processes. Some planning factors such as remote work, which was definitely something newer for the sixth cycle, they should continue to be monitored. There isn't a one-size-fits-all approach, and luckily the report doesn't say there is a one-size-fits-all approach to that. So that'll be addressed and monitored later. Removing obscure processes, such as removing an alternative RHND process that I have actually never seen used in the past 2 decades. Removing redundant methodology factors, adding options to streamline an appeals and allocation processes where the COG determines that's beneficial. So we could add time if we had more time for the RHNA process. And providing more technical assistance and guidance for COGS to navigate the requirements. Because as COGS, we're the driver of methodology, but sometimes there are questions that we're unsure if the state has an opinion on, because we don't want to submit something they're going to ultimately reject. So we do want to be consistent, and we want to minimize back and forth and streamline where possible. But some areas of concern. HCD did recommend that the expansion of income categories, currently there are 4 in RHNA. They cover from very low income all the way to above moderate. So you have 0 to 50% for very low, 50 to 80%, 80 to 120%, and 120% and above. So affordable housing is considered 80% or less of county median income, but HCD has indicated that they'd like to expand that to 6 income categories. So taking that last income category and splitting that further, and this is intended to address homelessness and homeless populations. So that is something that was actually their first recommendation, is to incorporate homelessness into RHNA, because it currently isn't. But by doing so, or to do that, they recommend 6 income categories. They also recommend the removal of the regional housing needs determination process with the COG. I do want to note the caveat that in print, that's what it says. In a one-on-one meeting with HCD, they verbalized they wanted to take a small part of that process out. But if you read the report, it does say it refers to the process, not the part of the process. So if they are removing it, we definitely want them to make that specific detail, because we don't want them to remove the entire process. It also requires a COG to consult with HCD if our draft methodology does not further the 5 objectives and obtain HCD approval before adopting. It goes into more detail in the report, but I did want to highlight the reason for this. The current structure is that for the methodology, the COG is required to adopt its own methodology. And so it can differ from other COGs. It can differ cycle to cycle, but it's up to the COG to come up with that draft methodology. So we have for the 6th cycle, SCAG had an extensive public hearing process. We had workshops. We had lots of opinions about it, but we finally got a consensus. So we're required by law to submit that to HCD as our draft RHNA methodology. So they have about 60 days to review it and make a determination whether or not it furthers the 5 objectives of state housing law. They'll submit their comments back to us. For the 6th cycle, they actually said said it was consistent with state housing law, furthered the objectives. So the COG can take those comments, adopt as is, but they do have to have a resolution or some kind of approval why they think it's consistent and furthers the 5 objectives. So it still is up to the COG after HCD comments to adopt their final methodology. But this report actually has it so that if HCD finds it does not further the 5 objectives, there's another consultation process, and it's not clear how transparent this is, who's involved, but they do know another consultation process, and to obtain HCD approval before we adopt. So that does remove some of the COG discretion on how we adopt our final methodology. So I did want to point this out in the report. Finally, they also highlight regarding the consistency of the RTPS development pattern and RHNA. While current law says that the RHNA must be consistent with the development pattern of the RTPSES or Connect SoCal plan, they do note how they should be essentially they are maybe working towards one and the same. It doesn't exactly say that, but they are putting in language in the report to recommend that they work towards each other, but that could affect then forecasting. So I'll get into that a little bit as in the rest of the slides. So just a brief note about the structure of the report. They divide it on how these issues are recommended to be implemented. So there's recommendations of the state legislature. So these are statutory changes. There's policy considerations. So they may not have an exact way to change law, but they recommend that legislatures consider these as they create legislation. There's also future HCD efforts. So these are things within their purview that they can do administratively. And then there's also an appendix, a summary of their outreach. And then the topic areas, they go over then the RHND, Regional Housing Needs Determination process, methodology appeals and allocation process, and also consistency with with RTP SES, our Connect SoCal plan. So again, the overview of our recommendations to HCD. And again, this is its own attachment in the report. So to spare you lots of details, lots of technical information, high-level overview. There are things such as increasing transparency and due processes for RHNA, reinstating trade and transfer. We've heard that many times throughout the process, so we definitely included that as a recommendation. Increasing requests that HCD increase funding opportunities tied to housing and housing production, better assisting our jurisdictions in navigating the appeals process, and addressing challenges to housing, building, and production, which can include incentives to build. So some of our comments addressed in the report, as I mentioned earlier, we requested an earlier date to receive the RHND, and they actually had that as a recommendation. However, we also inquired them to have more funding opportunities tied to RHNA allocation. And while they don't have a full commitment to that, they do note the possibility of rewarding jurisdictions who do meet RHNA goals by providing more funding opportunities. And then we also requested that jurisdictions have more time between the RHNA allocation and the deadline for housing elements, since state law gives the intention of 1 year. And obviously SCAG would like to give as much time as possible, but you also don't want to rush the RHNA process. That's not directly addressed, but we think by moving RHNA up 1 year will allow for some more flexibility and more time to complete housing elements. There were comments that we sent up that were not addressed by HCD, and some of them are actually things that SCAG can do for the 7th cycle. So one thing we did request was having our existing need in the RHNA allocation for the region. So there's projected need, how much you need for based on household growth, but there's also a need for populations here that may be due to overcrowding, cost burden, providing more housing units to address that existing need. We requested existing need be spread out over multiple cycles because it was such a large component for the 6th cycle. That was not addressed at all in the report. Establishing formal processes for HCD as part of the regional determination process, and convening a panel of experts. So this is something that was mentioned in the last item about AB 2485, increasing transparency, having a panel of experts be part of the regional determination process. It was not addressed in the report at the time of this our report here. It was still on the table, but between then and now, it died. What we call it, agonizing, a slow agonizing death. Sad moment of silence. And then reinstating trade and transfer was not addressed either. Other things not addressed, exercising the option of additional time for appeals. That actually is in current state law, just because the last cycle was so condensed. We were not able to exercise an option. We hope we certainly can if that 1-year extension was granted. Preparing a guidebook to help with the appeals process. SCAG can do that in-house. So certainly for the 7th cycle, we want everyone who wants to participate will provide more guidance. A few things that are contrary to HCD's recommendations that are contrary to some of our comments. So HCD, we did recommend procedures be established to publicize data sources during the regional determination process. As I mentioned before, the text recommends the removal of the entire process. HCD does indicate it's just a part of that process. So it does, even if it's a part of that process, it does still remove a level of interaction and transparency that could be built into this process. And then establishing additional due processes opportunities in which COGs and jurisdictions can appeal the RHND. I do want to note, while not directly addressed, it does recommend the removal of that COG consultation process. SB 7, which I believe is on the governor's desk as we speak, does specifically add language in which a jurisdiction that is not covered by a COG, they are prohibited from appealing to RHND. It doesn't explicitly say that it's for a COG such as SCAG, but it does remove that due process for COG or for jurisdictions not part of a COG. So just something that's contrary to what we requested. Other inconsistent things, so facilitating conversations with HCD to ensure determination process. Again, with 2485, that could have been an opportunity for more transparency, more expert conversations. That was not part of it either. And considering different methodologies and assumptions. So one thing, again, as I mentioned before, it's not directly addressed, but contrary to our comment, HCD does recommend that our draft methodology, if it's does not further the 5 objectives, that HCD would have the final say for a methodology. So things that are not in our comment letter, but again, that are important, I want to draw your attention to the addition of the 6 income categories, removal of the comparable region for vacancy rate calculation instead of the national average. This is kind of out of left field right here, but I did want to note that we did actually write an appeal letter to our original RHND, and we protested the use of a national average comparing vacancy rates when the law says comparable average, because we are not comparable by any means to any other metro area in the US. So they decided to use a national average, which could, in the end, could be interpreted as adding more units based on overcrowding in our region. So just something that we appealed on, and they're requesting actually to codify what they did for SCAG. Granting HCD authority to establish higher income limits in areas with high housing costs. What this means is, as part of the RHND, they give us 4 or now 6 income categories. This would also start looking at areas with high housing costs and adjusting the income categories for those areas accordingly. So kind of like a methodology within the COG for the RHND. So just another layer, something to point out. And then also applying the RHND cost burden factor to the existing population rather than get into numbers. This would basically, if they did this for the 6th cycle, would make our 1.3 million number even higher. So this is something they want to codify for the next cycle. Other things, again, COG obtaining HD approval for the RHND or RHNA methodology prior to adoption, and also requiring that the development pattern of the RTP Connect SoCal plan must be consistent with RHNA. Currently, it's just the other way around. This does add another layer to our regional planning. So our next steps, after you've reviewed this 160-page report, what are our next steps? So we do expect further legislation to be proposed to implement HCD's report. This report was dropped in April, and you've already seen a slew of legislation that implements this report. So we do expect more coming for the next legislative cycle. We also sent a letter to the state legislature formally requesting a public hearing on the report. We do want HCD to clarify their recommendations, their meaning behind it, and also the engagement process to get to those recommendations. Any legislative work will be guided as well by the legislative committee here at SCAG. And we've also invited HCD to come to our future regional council to go over their report. So that was a lot of information, but it was a large report, but I'm more than happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you very much. I will now entertain comments from members of the CHD committee. And I see, we'll go second. No, too much coffee. The Honorable Wendy Buckman.
Wait, yeah, I know.
I meant,
Copy. I will let somebody else go before me if you want.
oh, no.
Okay, fine.
I know.
All right. The first question actually was answered in the prior agenda item. Like what really happened to the bill? Thank you for your colorful explanation of what happened in that. And you did give us the answer. The political will just is not there. And I want to thank you for asking for a formal public hearing on this HCD report and for inviting HCD to come here and speak, because I think that are excellent asks. I think that the legislation really did get to the heart of what we're trying to do, and that is create transparency. Why do we want transparency? Well, imagine understanding what needs to be done so that we can be more efficient in our job, just like we as municipalities have been asked by HCD to be more transparent to our constituents so they understand what's happening. This is the exact same ask. And so to see a piece of legislation fail and not have political will based on those basic tenets is extremely disappointing. And I do look forward to hearing from HCD in person on that. Number two question that I have, you mentioned in your presentation that one of the areas of SCAG concern was that is a general misunderstanding regarding RTP SCS and that development pattern in making sure that there's RHNA consistency. Can you expand a little bit? I know you touched on it and maybe you don't have the info, but expand on that point and provide us with more context as to the misunderstanding on this RTP SCS development pattern and that RHNA consistency.
Yeah, so one thing so we have a growth forecast that we use as a basis of RHNA, but it's also used in our Connect SoCal plan. So there is some consistency already built in. But for RHNA has also different goals than the Connect SoCal plan. And so you have the further 5 objectives of RHNA, whereas those don't exist in statute for Connect SoCal. They have their greenhouse gas emission goals, for instance, is a big one there. And so there is some overlap in goals, but it's not one and the same. And one big thing for RHNA is the need for both existing and projected need. And so what ends up happening, because our Connect SoCal plan and the forecasting, the plan itself is tied to things such as air quality conformity. Federal funding is tied to it. And so if you end up having to require both the RHNA projections, which is both projected and existing need, as part of Connect SoCal or regional transportation planning, you could end up in a situation where you fall out of conformity and your greenhouse gas emission targets are not met. So without going to like graphs and details, but essentially this could affect federal funding and also how it trickles down to local jurisdictions. So we do want a level of consistency, but I believe it was phrased of what we want is not necessarily how it's being implemented at the state level. So there is some inconsistency between what this report recommends for that consistency level versus what we think is a good idea for consistency.
Okay, so that's going to be something very important that we stay on top of. Then just final question on AB 3093. That you've noted that legislation's already been introduced to implement one of the findings in this report, in the HCD report, and this is AB 3093, which would introduce 2 new income categories in the RHNA allocations and housing elements to address the homeless populations and the housing need. Can you provide us with the latest on AB 3093 when the proposed legislation and when this would require the RHNA to include the 6 instead of the 4? I think you mentioned the goal is before the 7th cycle. So could you just mention dates specific?
Yeah, as I guess Francisco, who's also legislative staff, would you like to give an update on where 3093 is at?
Thank you.
Sure. Certainly. Good morning. Francisco Barajas, Senior Legislative Affairs Analyst. 3093 officially made it out of the legislature, so it is sitting on the governor's desk as of now, and it would go into effect immediately once signed by the governor, depending on, which items you're speaking of that would be implemented. But the goal is to begin implementation so that it takes into effect by the 7th cycle, which was the goal of the report.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification. That's everything.
Thank you very much. The Honorable Keith Hike.
Thank you. Great report, great update. Really appreciate it. I'm going to read the whole thing through a couple more times. The gist that I took away from this that I want to share with my constituents are things like we have more generally unfunded work to do and complexity. We have more confusion around how to do this, and we have less transparency. Can you tell me a few things of good news that maybe I can share with them when I share this update?
I think a win, and that is a good point. I think a good takeaway is that starting 1 year earlier could at least, while there's confusion, there may be more work, at least it's a little more stretched out hopefully a little less rushed. So 1 year would, in the process, adding 1 year to the process would greatly, I think, benefit everyone. But I hope I don't eat my words.
Thank you very much. The Honorable Tanya Doby.
I always appreciate your presentations. I have three, I think they'll be quick questions. The first is, can you tell me what HCD believes is less than 0% to justify 2 additional categories under the low that we currently have?
So apologies that I should have clarified. So currently, very low is 0 to 50%. So it's basically splitting it up so that extremely low and acutely low would be 0 to 15%. So that would be considered more of the homeless individuals, homeless populations. And then the next category is 15 to 30%. And then you have 30 to 50%. So it is currently included between 0 and 50. They're just splitting it up more.
Do they have a justified reason? Is it supposed to be addressed differently? Will there be grant opportunities or funding opportunities that will address these additional requirements?
So in the report, there isn't, but the hope is that they will provide some guidelines, especially for jurisdictions doing their housing elements that do have to address the acutely low, extremely low that they already have to do. And I should have clarified, extremely low is already a category in housing elements. So that's 0 to 30%. But acutely low would be very new. So we're hoping HCD will provide that guidance in time so you can meet state law and address those population needs.
Okay. My next one is, I have a very hard time understanding who HCD actually reports to. Like, who is over them, who gives them their rubber stamps. Because when I was going through the process, I went to my assembly, supervisor, senator, Congress, and everybody basically said, no hice nada. They're, they just kind of, they are an entity unto themselves. So is it just the Senate Appropriations Committee that they report to, or who do they actually report to where they can just come and carte blanche tell us local municipalities what we gonna do?
Kevin Gilhooly, State and Federal Legislative Affairs Manager, happy to answer that question through the chair. So HCD has a director, and the director is appointed by the governor of California, and so that's who HCD responds to.
To the governor.
Yeah, directly.
It's the first time I've ever gotten that answer. Okay,
I
and
learned
then
something new as well.
my last question is, I believe you said that the Legislative Committee of SCAG, if I promise to behave, how do I get on that? Like, you can take my coffee, I'll drive myself wherever, I'll buy my own flights. How do I join that gang?
I think
I mean, it's a gang against a gang. I took my mic off at this point. I mean, come on.
Me again. So through the through the chair, happy to answer that question as well. So the bylaws prescribe certain requirements for members of the Legislative Communications and Membership Committee. First among those is that you must be a member of the regional council. So the committee is made up exclusively of members of the RC. And then secondarily, the board president has the ability to appoint a number of regional council members to that. So there is no requirement that there be geographical equity or whatnot. There's no requirement there be a certain number of committee members, but generally the board president will try to develop some level of fairness when making his or her appointments to that committee.
Great. I'm sure the answer is no. Do you have a small city representative?
Let's see here.
You cook on it.
Yes.
You don't have to tell me right now. Really?
Yeah. Maybe not 11,000 like Los Alamitos, but I think Linwood, our vice chair is Linwood Mayor Jose Luis Salache, and I think they're at the about 30 to 40,000. So if that meets your small city requirement.
No, because that's 3 times my city. I'm talking really small.
I mean, there's
Villa
only
Park
a handful
small.
of cities of your size.
La Palma small,
So,
Los
La
Alamitos.
Palma. No, our RC member from La Palma is not on the committee, but I'd be happy to go through those with you afterwards too and let you know who's on
I got to
there.
talk to you
Yeah.
anyway after, so.
Thank you very much. And next, the Honorable Frank Serenian. Great to see you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think those were great questions, and one of my comments was going to be addressing the issue of the executive branch which has been quite unfortunately not interested in some of our things. I don't think, I've said it before and I say it again, I don't think state is interested at all in building housing. I think state is interested in claiming that they are attempting to build housing. So that gives them the votes, but actually, because if they intended to build housing, they would set aside several $100 billion for subsidies, especially at the lower levels, in order to be able to buy property and allow developers to do their work. Second, they would allow regional work or allowing jurisdictions to make sure that they can get housing among them. That would build housing. But none of this is interesting to them because I'm convinced that they're not interested in really building housing. It's all about politics. So what I'm coming to is, the good question is, well, there's a gubernatorial election coming up. So if they want to play politics, I would suggest let us play politics just as well. Let us interview every single gubernatorial candidate and say to them that we will throw our absolute support behind them if in fact we can restructure HCD. It's their power, it's their organization, it's a executive branch organization. And I suggest, Mr. Chair, you're part of the RC, that you suggest to the leadership of SCAG to arrange such a meeting with every candidate that is running for office. Because the only way we're going to do this, to be honest with you, is by playing politics just like they are. There's no other way. It's just, I'm convinced after all these years, I've been doing this now for a couple of decades, and the last 5 has been excruciating. It's very unfortunate, but it is what it is. If we don't restructure HCD, if we don't find a political solution to all of this, it's going to continue this way. And we're just going to talk at each other and nothing is going to happen at the end of the day because, you know, housing is done by really doing it and not just by talking about it. The other thing I was going to ask is, in fact, to prove my point, Mayan, perhaps you can get, and I think Kevin also worked on this, let's see the data on how many permits are being issued over this time period that this is being shoved down our throats. Let us see how we're progressing. Let's look at the data. Let's see how their way is working. I'd like to know. Because if I can guess, I am guessing that it's not working the way everybody is saying that it's working. I'm sure there are more permits, but I doubt very much that there are enough permits to justify the draconian measures that we're facing. So let's find out. Let's see what the data is and deal with that when we talk to the candidates and talk about HCD reform. Those are my comments, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Honorable Gabriel Reyes.
Well, you did call, so I'll ask my question. Thank you so much. I did have a question in regards to the additional 2 categories that comes to the housing. Because our city, we just approved our 6th element of the housing, but from what it sounded like now, I'm very fortunate being a rural, smaller city. Well, 30,000, so I guess I'm not small anymore, but we, knock on wood, we don't have a homeless population. I think when we did our last count, we were between 10 and 16 in our community. So are you saying that a community like myself would then have to add on housing?
So currently at the RHND, the regional level, we would have a acutely low population that we would need to account for. How that's distributed is unknown at this point because it's unclear if that should be built directly into the methodology, how it should be distributed, what's equitable. These are a lot of questions that we wouldn't be able to address right now. Hopefully HCD will provide guidance.
Got it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The Honorable John Gabbard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is a simple one on how do we resolve disputes and interpretation between HCD and this body?
I think we pay lawyers, but.
Well, I know that may sound like it, but everything that I am seeing, both through this discussion and our work in the city, is that HCD is encroaching daily or maybe even cascading into judicial branches, obligations and responsibilities. And what is this body's take going to be if there is a disagreement? Are we going to go to the courts, or are we just going to acquiesce?
And so is this the question, is the question referring to how we would engage with HCD during the process in the 7th cycle?
Sorry. If the political will of this body is different than the interpretation provided by HCD, how are we going to respond to that? Are we just going to acquiesce, or are we going to fight back in the courts?
So
Governor first.
And it's partially rhetorical, I understand that, but I just throw it out there for all of us to consider as we go forward, that they are daily encroaching more and more into the interpretation role of the courts as opposed to just having an opinion. And we may have to fight.
And so what I'll say is I'll highlight some of the next steps that Maya noted in her presentation. In that we are requesting, we've submitted a letter requesting a public hearing on this report so that there is greater transparency and an opportunity for us to really understand what is intended. Mayan highlighted a few areas where we interpret some of the language in a way that's different from what HCD has noted that they intend to occur. And so having a public hearing, having a public space for them to explain intent and how they see this rolling out, and for us and other stakeholders to be able to participate is going to be an important opportunity to fully understand what this all means. As I noted, we also have invited HCD to come and speak and provide us more information. So I think those are going to be opportunities to get greater transparency, understanding of where there are those areas of misalignment and kind of go from there. So I apologize, I'm not fully answering your question, but I want to highlight there are some opportunities that we're pushing for to have more discussion and transparency on what is intended with this report.
Thank you for that. I would say that, as we all know, HCD watches this. And so I would encourage them to participate as you've invited them, so that we don't have the signal that they really just don't care.
Thank you very much. Honorable Aquanita Warren.
Hi, thank you for that presentation. Great information. One of the things that I think is really missing in this is the relationship building that we have with our legislators. They are up in Sacramento, but they do come home sometime. And how are we engaging the group that represents this huge region and understanding our needs? Maybe I'm wrong, but when was the last time we pulled them all in the room and said, remember us? Remember the things that we represent? We can't get away with hiding behind showing up on Friday and Saturday with a resolution for someone that just got honored in something. And that's the extent that the public sees you. We're out there on the streets daily. And listening to Bobby talk about the problems when you're trying to do housing, how the citizens react, is because they have not seen or been told all of these obstacles that their leaders are going through just to provide a necessary right, and that is to have housing. We've all saw what has happened at the state level with the taking of redevelopment. There went the infrastructure needed to do this housing. Now we're taking away the opportunity of really doing housing with all the things that are obstacles to get housing. I think what I grew up in, now we don't call it South Central anymore. I grew up in South Los Angeles. And we used to take our issues to the street. And I think it's time to take these issues to the street, meaning tell the residents the obstacles we're having, show the residents in a way that they can understand, because it's going to take me a couple of days to go through this report. What is exactly happening and how it's impacting our ability as leaders to provide that house and why that house is important. One of the things, I had a meeting with some citizens about a month ago. They had forgotten they had kids and that those kids grow up and they need somewhere to live one day. You're complaining about they won't move out of your home, but they can't because they can't afford to move out of your home and they want to stay near you as you get older, but they can't. So now they came up with ADA. Okay, but then they forgot about utilities and how they were impacted. We cannot keep this process up where we're running around in circles and not looking at the impacts. We're going to have to do public output to tell the public this is what we're enduring. And that means we need to point to the legislators that are creating this problem.
Thank you very much. And our time constraints, if you didn't know already, our meetings are now ending at 11:45 so that you can grab lunch or head to regional council if you're part of that. So I'm going to take a comment online and then one has been asked by the vice chair if he wishes, and then we'll continue this discussion many, many times and more so. So the Honorable Kathleen Kelly.
Thank you. Help me understand why trade and transfer is not warmly embraced by HCD. And I'll give you one, for instance. One of our neighbor cities would love to help fund student housing adjacent to our CSU campus if they could receive credit toward their RHNA allocation. What's wrong with that? It creates housing. It creates a type of housing that's desperately needed. What's the objection?
That's a great question. So it used to be in state housing law where that was an option after a jurisdiction received its draft RHNA. However, those who advocated for its removal, I believe it was SB 828 in 2017, but they noted that that could be used as a tool for certain jurisdictions to dump, if you will, their lower income housing units on other jurisdictions. So over concentrating lower income groups where they already are. So that was one of the reasons. It was about equity, if you will.
Well, I wonder then if conditions might be proposed to meet that objection rather than throwing out the entire concept.
We did certainly add that to our recommendation to HCD.
Thank you very much. And last comment today, I'll call on the Honorable Vice Chair Rocky Rhodes.
Okay, so this comment is to this body. We're all, well, most of us all electeds, and we know that there's two jobs, getting elected and being elected. And we're now making the sausage and we're trying to solve these problems. I want to comment, Mr. Gabbard and Ms. Warren's comments. Those are strategic questions on how do we affect change. And I asked for your vote to sit in this chair because in the normal course of things, between 2 years here and 2 years there, I want to be head of the fight in 4 years from now when we're really in the mix. I'd say that there's two tactics. There's chess and checkers. And I think that we work with our legislative group to work on the chess game and try and figure that out. And then we, as a body, work on the pieces that we can chip away at, and the death by 1,000 cuts, and find things like trade and transfer. We can go, hey, here's a compromise. Let's get this right. And so if we work hard in this group to work on those things while coordinating with legislative to work on the big picture stuff, maybe we can get, and maybe we can actually get a change in the executive office. So please know that we're all fighting the same fight, and we're going to spend years at this. So we're going to have to stretch our frustration out for a while, but that shouldn't be too hard. Anyway, that was my only comment on that.
Thank you very much, and thank you for all your comments. I know we're going to have a lot of work to do, especially in this committee and all of us individually as well. I just want to thank you for your report. Thank you, Mayan. Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you, Darren. All great reports. Just want to mention 2024, as Darren mentioned, the Southern California Demographics Workshop. Registration is still open for the SCAG's 2024 Demographic Workshop, where industry-leading experts will discuss how changing population growth affects regional planning, from accommodating growth to improving quality of life and growing the economy. The event will be held this month on September 24th in person at SCAG's main office downtown Los Angeles here and online. In-person attendance is free for elected officials and city managers of SCAG's member jurisdictions. It's really an informative and interesting event, and I urge you all to attend or have your city managers attend as well. Want to announce the $50 million goods movement grant, which you, I'm sure, are aware of, but SCAG received a $50 million grant for clean technology improvements that will reduce pollution from goods movement in the region. With this funding, SCAG will support the Last Mile Freight Program, which supports deployment of nearly 300 zero-emission fueling stations and up to 740 medium and heavy-duty trucks. The award comes from the United States EPA's Climate Pollution Reduction Program, which is providing grants to invest in efforts to reduce greenhouse gases, improve air quality, create jobs, reduce energy costs, and benefit low-income and disadvantaged communities as part of the Inflation Reduction Act. Lastly, I want to congratulate Council Member Honorable Frank Zerunian on his publishing of his new book. The book is entitled, yes, Advancing and Negotiating Sustainable Development Goals, a Practical Toolkit. The latest work by CEHD member Zerunian offers a hands-on approach aimed at addressing many of the world's most pressing challenges. As always, we are grateful to have his perspectives on this committee, and we are thrilled that he has offered to, if you buy the book, he'll sign it and tell you stories and buy you a cup of coffee. Okay. And I just want to thank our clerk, Carmen Summers, our legal counsel, Scott. Thank you very much, and introduce our new government affairs officer, Jonathan Davis.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and committee members. My name is Jonathan Davis, and I am the new government relations officer that will be staffing this committee. I'm excited to be here, and please know that I am here as a resource to all of you. I do have one reminder for our committee and members of the public, and that is SCAG's active transportation and safety call for applications for our Sustainable Communities program remains open until September 27th, 2024. SCAG will award between $6.3 and $8.2 million to projects throughout the region that support SCAG's Connect SoCal 2024 mobility goal of building and maintaining an integrated multimodal transportation network. Project categories include community/area-wide plans and quick build projects throughout the region. For more information, you can visit our website or contact SCAG Regional Planner Rachel Ohm. And Rachel also wanted to let everyone know that office hours are still available for interested applicants on Monday afternoons and Thursday morning. There are sign-up opportunities for these office hours on our Sustainable Communities Program website. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and welcome, of course. Any announcements? Any announcements here or online? Seeing any? I will just say that the Regional Council today and earlier the EAC confirmed we are supportive of October 2nd, which is Earth Day, nationally, internationally maybe, and wish everybody a happy holidays in advance, because we are not meeting till October 7th. In recognition of Rosh Hashanah, this committee will not be meeting next month. Our next meeting is scheduled November 7th, 2024 at 10 a.m. The meeting is now adjourned. Thank you.